lama dang gombo jin jin jambe yang la chan ca lo gang ge lo zhen zhen nian zhen da nian da ra nam da ra sa qi nian deng gen qi xian sen ji nian ge dong ge lian bang zin ne gang da se bi zun ra ra ma zhi men tong ma dong ma len ge se bi zhou zuo gong lai bu ji da ran zi yan lai zhou qu yang di song zhou da rai qi ri zhou yuan na ma ni long le ji jiang zhou zhou zi jing ma ri mun si ren dong a lai nyun ku ji nian jun zi ra ji nam du nian dao jin sang ju ta ran sun ne yun den lun zuo jia le sen tu wu gu chu chai chu dang ju nian gen de da le mun si len jiang bei yang lai du Omara Bazana de Omara Bazana de Omara Bazana de Omara Omara Bazana de 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 Zeden je ken raba sere je tale de mo memba rasalani Kadai den je shulun to ba ye lo je po be Nawai zaren do su gang se ta warai de pa ham Chung se chi warai de na yang Kombo jam yang chen ye ne keng me pa yang Tong warai shu Je chenpe su de nye me xin Song ne me lang chenpo nga jat Pe kor dar nga chen do chen me do Tun pa tu je chen la cha za lu Jen so long pe me dong bo le Jar we nam ru rang shen chen je do Chen zo pe je yuen de so ba Pe ma chung ne dan luen pe zi lo jiong Lo zhong tong me a ria de wa dang Yin ye chong lang chen ge zhao pe xia Yuen de yuen dan xia je yuen la Gen zhu chong nye nam la so lo wa de me Ma yue sen ge gang ge ri pe me Si de re long ne Chang zing kun se kyang Chang pe pa jir du ze kun nye pa Rong zim chu ge sang bo jia jir Kang ri to ka la rin chen nyung pe gu lo Yuen den kun chung ka we jia zara do Nying pe duen do pe pe na jir pa Long chen ram sham shab la so lo wa de Rik tong chang pa le shun ne chi lab le Kong pe long ne Po pe ter je do lo Long do chu zen jang chung nga wang ju Mi pham jam yang nam jal la so lo wa de be Ong min chu je ing ge po rang ne De sum sang je kun je ngo Rang sum chu go ngu sum don ze ba Za we lam me shab la so lo wa de be De yang do wa nam ki ta da nyam be sim jen tam je dung ale yun de nye dang dal de top ja lan na me pa yang na Zo bi sang je je ko bang rin bo che la ko bara je wo Di che do tam bi chu di ni sen jen chul shin do nyam su len bara ji wo Nyam be sam ba chang ju cho do to ge ba rin bo che Sal da bi go ne sem ba ra shu
At the beginning of class, please give rise to bodhicitta, thinking, may all sentient beings who are as numerous as the sky is vast attain perfect, may all of them be free of suffering and the causes for suffering, and may I be able to establish them at the level of perfect and complete Buddhahood, the ultimate attainment. And in order to do so, may I study the precious teachings and put them correctly into practice. With that kind of motivation, engage in your studies.
Kang sembara chawe chuge rinpa ne me pham rinpo che zebe kepe tsula chubi ngo she chawe tencho tinye yinpa ne de la yang ne joja tso de teni kepe ne chu ne chugi tom shi soso yang dakpa rinpa shi Tendesne yobe nangne tambo kebi ne chu de la yang ane phungbo kablare phungbo de la yang ane suki phungbo de la yang tene suki phungbo nane tene che gyusuk shedang desu chukji dinde yobe nane desu chukji nangla tene chugi che wangbo nga da deong nga da xu sinne da chu xu sinne da chukji da che chugi geche pai su dang da ngomba kundu dan chugi geche pai su ngomba zo dan namba ri chi mai be su de zine da chukji zige ra ngomba nga da deong nga chi chu chi an de ka ngomba kundu dan na chugi geche pai su ane chi ngomba zo dan na namba ri chi mai be su da dan da de chugi geche pai su ko la ne te yo.
The text that we're studying in this class is The Gateway to Knowledge, authored by Mipam Rinpoche. And the main part of the text is discussing 3 main topics. First, the 10 topics of expertise, then the 4 seals of Dharma, and then the 4-fold correct discrimination. Out of these 3 topics, we're currently discussing the first one, the 10 topics of expertise, and from within those, the first one are the aggregates. The aggregates, within the aggregates, we're currently discussing form. And form is further divided into a discussion of the 4 causal forms, the 4 correct elements, and the 11 resultant forms. And the 11 resultant forms discuss the 5 sense faculties, the 5 sense objects, and then the 11th mental object. And we have completed the discussion of the 5 sense faculties and the 5 sense objects, and now we're in the discussion of the third one, the third type here. Or the 11th resultant form, which is described slightly differently in the Abhidhamma Samuccaya and the Abhidhamma Kosha. So in the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, it speaks about the 5 types of forms that are mental objects. So the sense sources of the mind, the objects of the these objects of the mind. And so we completed this discussion of these 5 types. And the Abhidhamma Kosha identifies as the 11th resultant form, the imperceptible forms specifically. And we're currently discussing that type of form, this imperceptible form.
Di nang la da number riche maimbe sude ane chidare yinna dinde kamen le de diru ane number riche maimbe sude domba tang domin tang pardom ki tobe lunga ki leshi yinla ane di engda semme kapsula yang an kyuma cheba yebe semje duba minba tang ane dinesene sungre ta de dang nyam du la da chwa shi le ne dang wo chwa de nang la ane number riche maimbe so de semle lokso chwa shi yenam senada semle lokso chwa shi yin sen semje duba minba tang sen semje duba minba tang sen de sung sung de ne semle lokso chwa shi res tadi tse condenser tse condenser ni di tse res condenser ni res to chwa tang nang gidwa ne tadi chwa de la di tsinshi sha de kala number ichi mai be su de condenser la de kala domba tang domin tang pardon sum sentence tsinshi ko na domba seti kala pena sotar ge rike do ane something ge domba something la komba la tenne chungwa do same tami be tenne komba la tenne chungwa do ji so tabi domba pena Tiring shopa, ane kelang chine, ane tiring nima nyingang chi karsana, nyine chi nyine ki dumba dhokwa, ta tiring shopa sojong tsu kelang chi songna, ane sanyi shopa nam malang padula nyine ki dumba dho yodera susu gyula. Ta tiraw, sanyi nam langna tene yang tuisu, ta nima chik mato lene yo mari di chine, sanyi tene dumba de 대한 좀 봤던 거래. 좀 봐요. 대인도 갈라다 가르스나 차찰 솔와데 안에 초가 조당 된조 된데 지사비 제라 아니 돈바 쓰긴지 제직다 톱 연결해 수술라. 다는 신기 다지 3된 된소한 된데랑네 3된 당보 3된 니바 3된 숨바 된 적이 다대 딩에 된 된조 3된 된조 톱 송나 아 되게 3된 게 돈바생 다 maybe 된데 또 송나 다 maybe 된데 또 뺏게 돈바지 그러와 돈바지 톱 연결해서 어디 진에 믹스에기 다 가려고 그래. 다디 심 게 뒤바다 되다. 믹스 심 뒤바 민바당 신송송. 그냥 돈바 마인바 남나 페나 남시시 바돌라 속견양 지역에 인생의 켈링 제송나 강사디기 줄라 돈바 민바데다 톱 용마레스 돈바 민바데다 덴데스 캡 톱송 스테이지. 뭐와 아니 다양 바르돔스나 니마추이 링랑아 샤사게 메람나 아니 니마추이 링라 샤 마사와게 바르돔지 톱레라 어 딘데스네 네 양년주의 링라 양가르스나 지 구마구에게 내가 지긴이 돌랍스나요 바르메 돈바지 딘데 톱이요 다디 인도갑라 네 넘버 렉체 마임비 소 센다베다 코밍라 넘버 렉체 마임비 소 테나 도다 또 소네 예실렙단데 도 코르지 number rekche maimba study mane mig la sopa mig ki tang subu ki rege daw tang lapa ki rege daw tendesne rekche maimbe su yes tendesne that's all.
So, in our discussion of imperceptible form, we have started the reasons for why imperceptible form is defined as a physical form. And the first reason reads, imperceptible form is an action of body or speech after having obtained a virtuous vow, an unvirtuous vow, or a vow with limited time span. It does, however, not consist of cognition because it is continuously present even at times of distraction or the absence of cognitions. And since we are currently in this discussion, one of the questions that came from you yesterday fits into this context here. So you asked about these imperceptible forms and the fact that here it is described as something that is different than the mind, that is not included in in cognitions into the field of the mind. So are imperceptible forms mental? Are they just mind? No, they're not. Here they're described as being something that is different than cognitions. And so they don't if they're not cognition, if they're not mind, then what kind of substance are they? What kind of thing are they? And the basis for illustrating that is the example of the vows, of vow, virtuous vows, non-virtuous vows, and vows with limited time span. So this is how we illustrate the imperceptible forms. And when we talk about vows, that is the virtuous vows, for example, that includes the in the 8 types of individual liberation vows, but also the vows or objective bindings of the rising that is obtained by the attainment of the dhyanas, the meditative absorptions, or the realization of the meaning of selflessness. So when one reaches these states of meditative absorption, for example, then one automatically obtains the vow or the binding factor that the one obtains this vow of meditative absorption, that which binds it. And so that's it. That is then for the time span of that life, or according to each of these different categories. And then there are also those kinds of vows that are temporary, like for example, the Sojang vows, purification vows that are taken for a limited time span, like one day. One takes them in the morning, in the early morning before sunrise, in one day, and then upholds these vows and has done, like has obtained the vow for the time span of an entire day. But at the next morning, when one wakes up again, then these vows are not there anymore. So the imperceptible form of the vow is not attached to one anymore. And so they're obtained, any of these. If we take the individual liberation vows as the example, then these are obtained through a ritual. One can see how the person who takes the vows does demonstrations, recites certain supplications, and goes through the ritual of taking the vow. And then through that, one obtains this vow. Or with the meditative absorptions, through the achievement of a certain level of meditative absorption of the first dhyana, second or third dhyana, then one obtains the vow or the binding factor of that absorption. The same with the obtainment of the meaning of selflessness. So it is something that is being obtained, that is that someone gets, that is different than the mind itself in this explanation here. Another example are then the non-virtuous vows, which are, for example, to vow that one will engage in activities of killing for the rest of one's life, or those temporary vows, like for example, also vowing that one won't eat any meat for a certain time span, like 10 days, or to engage in a vow to engage in stealing or on a daily basis for a certain time. Those kind of vows would be temporary vows, both virtuous and non-virtuous. So we will still get some more explanation of what this imperceptible actually refers to, this inhabitant. But in short, imperceptible means that it is actually a thing, an object that cannot be perceived by our senses. It cannot by our sense faculties. So the eye cannot see it. It's not something that we can come into contact with our senses. So we cannot touch those kinds of forms. That's why we call them imperceptible.
The kulung tang tamja chewa la so we gone tine domba denzo ta je number je mai su yi na namulam tang kewas denzo ya number je mai be su yi namsne mulam de ta sikyor dewa de inane dharera samlola dinde chi yabu yongwa sho ni yabu yongwa sho dinde samlo de simjung sim kewi sim dawra sim nang dogire 아니 다들 개화죠 용거로 다 개화대 지지는 넘버를 좀 많이 배수도 개화대 개화대라 양지 네 샤방도 지 간데라 다 개화인라 셈인긴당 개화인라 양 셈마인긴 데데스니 에바니 샤마니 다나양 개화인라 셈인긴도다 도 샤쇼고만 샤토고만 지당 개화도 지 셈마인 바 개위 제직라 샤송나니 단나마리 제 마인드 수도지 텐데 제 가능성나 리게 땅 투게 땅 통에 땅 텐데 가야메와도 지 베나 개화 베나 저 짐바 땅 개화 요르라베 개화데 따베나 셈 토라 샤나니 셈레 셈 마인 바 지당 개화 요르 따 짐바 땅나 개화 요르 슬랍셔체라 따 개화데 짐바 땅한테 통레데 디체라 개화대 통투기 말에 넘버를 제 많이 봤어. 넘버를 제 많이 봤으는 어디랬나이다. 베나 돈바데 휴디캅데라 창찰레 솔와 데브레 제라 돈바 톱레라 돈바데 통투기 말에 넘버를 제 많이 봤어. 다 짐바 땅 개화 중물에서 다 개화되는 통리 투기입니다. 다디 디도지라 샤나네 되네. 되네스레도와 넘버를 제 많이 봤어.
And you also further asked whether then, if these vows are attained at one point and then they are something that is not the mind that stays with one, whether then also other things like the aspiration prayers or aspirations and virtue would also be imperceptible forms as one accumulates virtue, for example, and that is also not lost at times of distraction. And with regards to the aspiration prayers, actually we can look at them from the perspective of just a recitation of aspirations, and then it's sound, it's words that we recite. If we think about the sincere wish or the wish that comes along with it, for these aspirations to come true, then this part is mental, that is thought. It's actually a it's a part of the mind, and or more specifically the mental factors. And if we speak about virtue, then yes, there are different ways of explaining what virtue is, but following the explanation here that we have regarding imperceptible form, then the question is this virtue that is being accumulated also an imperceptible form or not? It fulfills the criteria of imperceptible form here. It is actually something that is being obtained, and until it's used up, until it comes to ripening, exists within, like with the person, but is not part of the mind that changes as these non-conscious states arise, for example. So virtue is a kind of substance then, in this sense here, that is neither touchable nor seeable. We cannot see it, we cannot touch it, we cannot smell it. We cannot come into contact with it with any of our senses. But, and this is in line with later, we can see the first action. So when we look at the practice of generosity, for example, we can see how someone practices generosity, gives something to someone else. But the virtue that is accumulated through the practice of virtue cannot be seen subsequently, but it is accumulated and stays with that person. So in that sense, it's the same as a vow that is being taken and then exists with that person who took the vow. So, for the vow, it's a physical act of prostrating, supplicating, going through the entire ritual that is visible and makes one attain a vow, and then later it cannot be seen anymore. That's why we call it a imperceptible vow. And for the virtue that ensues from generosity, that would be the same. So in that sense, virtue here fulfills the same criteria, or would be thought of in the same way as the vows as imperceptible form in the specific context here.
tene tiwa kha sita ne dul charap se tanda dule gyur dang sine keja kola lebra duba le gyur sus na dul charap mangbo du ne ane rakpa som yongdi kap la tene ngobo rakpa tanda chungyo erwa di jine kola ta karesana ko mangbo du na ane rakpa ngobo ti chungyo erwa tene ko mingna ta duba le gyur sus la ra ta di pe mese chawa yus dul charo korong di pe mese chawa yu di yigi shepa gi ma do su su jiwo tenzo gi mi gi shepa gi da she to gi mares ni da de ke je chung de ta di gi la tan je jiwa ji le de re da mi gi she to sa re do se mi gi kan de she to sa do se na kyang she ri gyam ne da hil go de sang chul che chala ma go le re tenzo gi ta na she gi do se ne 다 시에 인사를 다 되는 계좌실 레벨 때디 시에조데 시에베게 대 둘차로 인지를 상금이더라 다 둘차로 이나 저기 메시기 시에 두기요 말에 깬나 때네 시에나 도서 디고 둘차랍 시와게 둘차랍 디 깬나 때네 시와데 디둘 가져서 받을 시와이나 인지를 차랍 시에 인지 말다 디 풀체기 잘라라 때네 따와데 당 따디상 나조 벤나 니마게 셀라 때네 둘차라 된조 또 통도 당보 강반낭라 둘 여바도 하동나양 개콩네 니마게 세르다오 된데 레용데 갈때니 니메 셀라 따디 갈라도 둘 충중 되는 망고 통기도 아이나양 따 니서기 둘데 통으레 마도베 단다 둘 차랍데 통요 마다 단다 풀체 쭉니 따디 값델라 따 풀체기 가주 툭툭지 통래 이 나양지 돌타랍 차쇼데다 자와 니네 통마토바게 디 베면서 차와지 열스나 따디 통화인기 말레스 따디 간스는 수수교게 통계코로 말아 단다디 단제데 돌 출세 중에 수수교게 통으로 와 따디 돌타라데 수수교게 통계로 말했으네 들려송으로 와
Another question was with regard to the deduced forms that we covered yesterday. When we spoke about deduced forms, we said that these are the very essence or the building blocks of more coarse kind of phenomena. We can see the coarse phenomena that are made up by these smallest particles, the smallest most subtle particles, but we cannot perceive the many smallest particles that make up these coarse phenomena, and we call them deduced forms because of that reason. When we analyze these coarse phenomena and we break them down further and further, eventually we cannot see particles anymore, but we know that they must exist, and therefore they arise as the object of the mind faculty while they really exist, but we cannot perceive them with our senses anymore. And now the question was with regard to modern methods. So if we said that these deduced forms, these smallest indivisible particles, they can be perceived by divine vision or bodhisattvas and Buddhas, but they cannot be perceived by ordinary sentient beings. Now, if it is so, there are things that we cannot perceive with our bare eye, but when we take, for example, a microscope or other technical appliances, then we nowadays come to see and know these objects. We can see them even directly through the lenses of a microscope. These are smaller particles that we usually do not perceive with our eye. Does that then change anything about the explanation of these deduced forms? These are things that would originally not appear to the eye faculty of an ordinary person. Not really. However much we break it down, and we can still perceive it, even if it is with microscopes and so on, if we are able to perceive it with our eye faculty, then that is still not the most subtle particles, these smallest particles. We can always go further in breaking them down, and the principle holds true. Like whatever is perceptible to ordinary sense faculties is still an object of that sense faculty, but it is not a final stage. There's always a way to break it further down, and the smallest indivisible particles will not be the object of the eye faculty of an ordinary person. This also holds true for other ways where we, through conditions, see things that we usually don't see. So if I look around in my room, I cannot see any dust flying around. The dust particles are not visible to my eye faculty right now. But when the sun shines into the room, then the light rays of the sun hitting these particles make them actually visible to me, right? So I can perceive these dust particles if there are certain conditions present, but I cannot perceive them at other times when there is no sun ray hitting the particle, for example. So in that sense, there are different conditions, whether they're natural conditions like the sun rays or microscopes and technical appliances, that make us able to see things that we usually don't see. But still, what we can see with those conditions in place is not the smallest part, not referring to the smallest building blocks. Those would still not be visible to the eye of an ordinary person, even with certain conditions in place.
네, 출제 쪽에 충종 지다지 차우지 통계도 살아 딜라 연결 출제게 따디가라 연결 도도양 차도 체나 충중대 도도한 인데 차 dumbu지 니 숨드네 땅나 도도한 땅에 여제레스 딜라양 나데는 말 땅니 dro송나 도도한 장실 양 카가지 양 출제 카가지 쪽에 디 충한데 연결지 통고에 서로 차주기로 봐 디인데가 단다 통교대 딱 둘처럼 수수께우기 통계 말해라긴 니디 인기 말했어. 단다 통교됐다 수수께우기 통해 도서 락바 강나간삼 충충지 통인로.
I just saw that some of you have trouble hearing me. Can you hear me okay now, or do you still have trouble hearing me?
Now it's okay. Now it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
It's improved these past few minutes.
Okay. So if we have certain machines or certain technical appliances that help us to see phenomena that we usually cannot see with our eyes, so if we have these conditions in place, then we can see a certain particle probably that we usually cannot see. But that particle, again, has different parts to it. If we yet take another appliance and attach that to the original one, or we take another type of microscope, or we take another type of machine to look at that particle, then we can see further divisions, further building blocks of that originally perceived particle. So then there might be an even more advanced machine that we can apply and that can see, again, smaller parts of that particle. So in this sense, those particles that we see through certain machines or appliances are still not the smallest particles that we are talking about with the deduced forms, but rather smaller, coarse kinds of phenomena, smaller, coarse kinds of particles.
So, tene dijela tangong dine chamne mala tangbor rangyu gi sembe jungwa nam gyor chene kyeshin chigde karasne gyui wangdo che number reche maimbe sugde reche maimbe sugde tangbo rangyu gi sembe jungwa sa chu me long tendo jungwa nam la gyula chewe gone ane ke yonggeres la beke charedo dine de gyu de la gyui wangdo samla tama an jungwa shi la soba dinde shas gyu.
If we now continue from where we have left off yesterday, then we are on page 20 with the second point. Imperceptible form first arises from elements embraced by one's mind or one's stream of being. So these imperceptible forms have as their cause the four causal elements, in the sense that the first arising of these imperceptible forms is caused by the four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. So they function as the cause that generates then these imperceptible forms.
Sinjung de la tende sa chu melung ki simba jungwa chimbo shegi sin nimba la de la tende jise do ten nyambam ten du jise du danda domba de ki tende ten so subo de ne nyamba ten nyam so na shi song na sen shiwa la so ba chung na ma do shiwa chung na de yang de je number ji mai be su de je mewa chang ro les shin ani tonggyu majung gi bardo 균차 bara jungwa yin ba dang tonggyu majung bardo da de number ji mai be su de da de domba de tongye gi gyu ma do pena shie daw chung na domba tongye gyu re de domba de pa mewa chang ro dong de yang je domba de yang yala phulna 다 제 변나 당고 제 돈바지 슈 양 돈바데 파 풀리샤나 개겐라 파 풀리샤나 양 돈바데 동도게레스 얘네양 셈라 마단조 제 삼계 추 겐든 레 준데 챙아치 메셈데 된데게 록다 안에 슈크춤보 된데 계송나 계자체나 계비자와 체송나 양데 동도게레스 Dini yang penna tanda di sotar ki domba dawra penna yang sotar ki domba tiring nimaji ki chedula lendi kabla ane tiring shopa ne domba leng ane tiring nima ningang de tsemo tsenga de sangni nam lang songna teyan domba de tong rubirwa nyene ki domba daw penna o dindesne da dine tongye ki gyu de majung ki bardula ane yun chapar degi yore sin chikdenzo domba de ngazo jumla penna samden tanda samden tangbo samden nipa samden sumba sendena tene samden tangbo nyamnenchi samden tangbo tarchene samden nipa lepdi kapdela ten samden nipa thob yongdi kala samden tangbo ki tongye ki gyu chare ten samden nipa charo re yang samden nipa la lepdi kapdela yang nyamnenchi yang samden nipa domba thob de rwa di charsabja yang samden sumba thob songna yang samden 이제 니바게 동바 동네야 삼대 순바게 동바 어디 라나 소저기 동바 동에 교서 답변은 삼대 라이나 공마데 랑 지그래도와 이제 동제기 교 때네 공마네 내가라 랑 치마데 파 동도기 사례다 때네 네 제우디 톱드리 갑라라와 또 어디에서네 동외기 교대 마중기 바도 균차바라 중화다 뒤기 개발하고 그래다 디제 단지 ngama데 측정 ngama데 유이 개발하고래 유대 중화시라 때는 중기열에스 동바데 넘버를 좀 많이 비슷한데 아니 뒤대 동주 마중기 바돌라 동에기 교된조 마상기 바돌라 교된조 마중기 바돌라 아니 데 나도 동바데 만한 소라 열에스 동주 마중기 바돌 중화 있는 바당스
So these four elements, the four causal elements that are embraced by one's stream of being. So here we speak about the sentient being. Then once it has arisen based on, once the imperceptible form, like the vows, has arisen based on these conscious elements, then based on these embraced elements, it continues until its support degenerates or a cause for abandoning it occurs. So then this imperceptible form will stay present based on the embrace elements, so based on the sentient being, until the support, the life of that person, the person will die, or other causes occur to abandon that, make the vow dissipate, make this imperceptible form dissipate. So if the person who took the vow, the person here is the embraced elements, if that person dies, then with it the imperceptible form also disappears. Or another scenario is that it might get abandoned, that one gives up those vows. One, for example, engages in the causes for, or if the causes for abandoning the vow are present. Death is one way that makes the vows disappear. Giving them back to one's teacher is another way of eliminating those vows, or abandoning or dissipating them. Another way is if when one develops very strong wrong views. There is no when one believes that there is no karma, there is no virtue, there is no non-virtue, no karmic actions, there is no karma cause and result, and so on. with those kinds of really strong wrong views, that is, we talk about the cutting through the roots of virtue, and that is also a cause for losing one's vows. So for specifically then for the temporary vows, like the Sojong vows that we take for only a day, which is a subcategory of the individual liberation vows, then those need the cause for their determination with the next morning, because they're taken from one morning to the next. Then when one wakes up the next morning after sunrise, then the vow has been terminated. But until termination happens, until one either dies or gives them back or engages in so wrong view that there's no basis for these vows to exist anymore, they will be continuously present at all times. The same holds true for the vows of meditative absorption. So these binding factors of the dhyanas, of the meditative absorptions. As one obtains the first dhyana, one achieves the vow of that meditative absorption, of the first of the absorptions. And as one practices then on that level, one eventually will achieve the second dhyana. The achievement of the result of the practice of the first dhyana then leads to the obtainment of that higher absorption, the vow of the higher absorption, the second one, and with that then the vow of the lesser one dissipates. The same then from the second to the third absorption. As one practices on the level of the second absorption, one has the vow that is associated with that absorption that one has obtained by reaching that level. And when one comes to the result of the practice of the second absorption, which is then the attainment of the third absorption, one will obtain the vow of the third absorption, and that functions as the cause for eliminating the vow of the second absorption. So the higher absorptions, the vows of the higher absorptions, as they're obtained, they cancel out the vows of the lesser absorptions, or the lower absorptions. Here, this discussion, the second half of this paragraph here speaks about the difference, the particularities of the time in which these imperceptible forms exist. The first sentence was speaking about the cause, so the elements embraced by one's stream of being, and then the second sentence it continues until its support degenerates, then refers to the time until which it is present. So until the causes for the dissipation of these vows or these imperceptible forms are present, until the causes for the degeneration and so forth are present, the imperceptible form will exist with that person.
Mo ke mige kangrung do ngepales ta de tanda number reche main be so domba dinzo ina domba de pena ya ngo de la ne domba taw ina pena kewa tang domin taw ina ne migewa den te yang dom domin dang tene pardon de la ina tene chi kewa da mige kangrung do nge de ra te de kabla tene sudo tawe domba ina da do ta di number reche main be so de so de ta lu tang ro lu ji go ne ta de Domba shui kapdana ta lugi guje tangera chang salwa la soba loben la solwa debe ta tin loben ki ma nangye taw rowa ani nga ki gone na ya chamdo shue tang ta de sik khorong chowa khorong ki dodang daw chine sik domba kari kyor gu na dong gu na tin do ji yue de ge rowa an de ra ta tin domba sungi kapla na ya lyunga ki le ka mang bo che chi ge rowa on din di kapla 룡아 기 제라지 임비 중세스와 룡아 제라지 레스 단딘조 디 임비 데나 줌젠 숨보데 속수 조과이노 줌젠 숨보 디기 세리가라 줌젠 담보게 데 셈기 뒤바 마이 바당 줌젠 니바데 주이 제바르데 중화시 중화시레 데네 중화인 바당 아네 숨바데 동주 마중기 바르돌라 tene ne degi yoba tene jumzen sumbo degi ane soksu joba yensen ta ngo ke mi ke lunga ke cheta laye de yagi kangi sumdi ki nangla zu deyo zare di nangla tadi ya kangi dezu nangla zu deyo tene soksu joba yenos soksu rungwa ta duro soksu rungwa sene khasang ya kangla soksu rungwa sene suki tsenye de la che lakpa la sokpa ke rekpaam nyoba dhawa chik tang tenya chebi gone sine nyi yoba ta duru dide ta rekbi gone ta pena zo soso tabi domba yoba kansa ke ta pena ten dhaw lu dhawa chik la pena nyoba chi song na teni digi domba de namba rechi maimbe suk de layan nyoba dhaw cha dhubi na ta rekpaam ta chik nyoba tena laya jo wang zo suk surungwa ke tenda de o tena chang de yores suk surungwa suksu joba inos.
Amade ludanga ke le yempa latine game gebati yempa di sola chi chagira gyumse sumla chetachi
lunga ki legi chirachi res luda nga ki lega mangbo yebe nane ta ewa dhaw chirachi res
ena indi gyumse la dugi marwa
gyumsen sumbo degi suksu chokpa inos gyumsen sumde ya gangla tangi shuba dire semki duba maimba laya la sobarwa gyu chungwashi
So, imperceptible form is a certain kind of physical or verbal action. Its identity is determined as being either virtuous or unvirtuous. So, in their essence, the vows, which are these imperceptible forms, can be either virtuous or non-virtuous. We have the virtuous vows that are those like vows which are virtuous. We have non-vows, these are the unvirtuous vows, and then we have temporary vows which can be either virtuous or non-virtuous, as we have seen in the previous discussion. And so these are specific physical and verbal actions, or they're based on physical and verbal actions that are being performed in the process of taking the vows. So this is a specification of the first point, that imperceptible form is an action of body or speech after having obtained a vow. So when a person receives a vow, they go through a number of physical and verbal actions in the context of the ritual that is connected to the taking of the vow. So there's a preceptor that is present in the room, and then the one who receives the vows will do prostrations, supplicate the preceptor, and then through a ritual will actually receive the vows. The preceptor will give the vows to that person. And in the process, there's also the recitation of, for example, the refuge and so on. So there are some different physical and verbal actions that are being done in the context of this ritual. And so it is based on these particular physical and verbal actions that one then achieves the vow and upholds them. Now, these are particularities of the first point. And it says here that there are 3 reasons, right? If we look back at page 19, imperceptible form is defined as physical form because of these 3 reasons. And Lamala explained now that the 3 reasons are actually different than in our translation. So the 3 reasons need to be counted as the fact that these imperceptible forms are not part of the mind. They're not, they don't consist of cognition that makes them form. Then they arise from the embraced elements, from the elements which are embraced by one stream of being. And they stay present. When we look at the time, they will stay present. They will exist until the causes for abandoning or dissipating these vows will be complete. So these are the 3 reasons why imperceptible form is a form. It's a kind of form. And even though it's not perceptible by our sense faculties, we define form as something that is suitable to be form, or that is suitable to be considered form through contact and inference. And so something that's actually something that can be pierced, that's suitable to form in the sense that it can be harmed in some way. And about that category, because they also can be harmed and dissipate if the support, which is the existence of that person, the body of that person before death. So if that person is being harmed, then the vows will also get harmed. So in this sense, they're also suitable to be formed. So in that sense, then physical form, imperceptible form can be identified as a physical form because of all the previously mentioned reasons. But just to clarify again, the reasons that Lamala mentioned here now are that it's not mind, that it arises from the elements that are embraced by one stream of being, and that the vows that is until cause for anticipation will subside, will be complete.
Sorry, Inka. I mistakenly pressed the dismiss of the record just now. Can you please recheck it?
The recording has been on for the entire time.
Oh, okay, thank you. I pressed something. I'm afraid that I pressed something wrong.
No, it's still recording here.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, if it stops, I'll turn it on again. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. So,
대양 당외 차찰와 안에 샘 당와 샘 당마 샘 가능 침보보네 되는 시간도 상계가 도 된바당 양 갑갑 시당 당외에서 시당도 기회보네 신라 주바 라소바 대파 아니 나 라소바네 직 주보 마와 다운 다위게 레든소니 주데 아니 르당 나케 르기 보네 베나 차찰와 도 아니 나기 보네 도 된바당 직 주보 라와 도 텐조니 아니 주 류나기 둘남레 양거 딜레 록스 주바지 메나 양사 메장 류당아 요와 류당아 요와스 류 차차데가 류 구제 당와 나네 도 덴비깔라 나 요와스 된 꼬바스 류지 남줄 류지 입 꼬바 류지 차차데가 류기 줄와 나네 도 덴비깔라 나게 줄당 o tenzo kepar wa te la ane le su joko sos ta di yang tambo me la number rikche gi su gi nyung ji she ta da di te yang la di ma la number rikche gi su gi nyung ji she ne ane number rikche ma yin bi su gi yang ngo chi ge yang ger samma chi ne te yang la di ma la yang number rikche gi su she ge re.
For instance, the substance of the act of prostrating out of faith, chanting a sutra, beating others, or speaking harshly out of anger is nothing other than the material body and speech. It is nonetheless a particular physical movement or verbal expression and should therefore be defined as a karmic action. So here we then elaborate further on imperceptible form. After having seen the workings of imperceptible form, the general principle of what it refers to, then here now we go a little bit, we introduce it a little bit more, what imperceptible forms actually are. So for instance, referring back to imperceptible form, the substance of the act of prostrating out of faith, chanting sutra. So prostrating out of faith, referring to the physical action of prostrating with a good motivation, with a clear mind, with a pure mind, or out of inspiration, out of faith. So that's the substance of that prostration, as well as the chanting of sutra. So if one recites the sutras that were spoken by the Buddha and so on, or if one, motivated by anger, hits someone else with a stick or speaks harshly out of anger, those kinds of actions, physical and verbal actions, are nothing but the movement and the expression of the physical body, of the elements of the physical body and the speech. So it is based on the causal elements that such expression is perceived. So when we do prostrations, for example, then this is an action, a karmic action, but it is based on the expression of how we hold our body, how we move our body, how the body appears, and moves. And the recitations of the sutras, they're the way that we use our vocal sounds, how particularly we express those sutras. So in that sense, they are karmic actions, but they are physical and verbal expressions based on the way that our body and our speech move, that are based on these physical elements. It's displayed as the display of the movement and expression of how the elements are arranged.
Le tene rangkune longje lunga ki dulge chopa nam shenla rikpar chedes de lunga yowa tang lunga kopa tang namjur ane di lega tegi sele tene ne di chang salwa la sopa sik zubu la sopa ki tenzo ki le tegi ya kewar che kuni longje sena kewar che ba lunga ki dulje chopa nam ane chi lunga ki tanda di chi lega chang salwa la sopa do dunpa la sopa ki di gyu imba de shengi yang rigires hakwar che rigwar che des.
By means of such an action, the gathering of physical and verbal particles activated by oneself is made perceptible to others. So these movements or expressions, these appearances of the body and the expressions of the words, the speech, which are prostrations or the harsh words, because they are the physical and verbal particles that appear in a certain way, that are arranged or move in a certain way, then this becomes visible to others. So we activate them, we bring them into that kind of state through our intentions, but it's visible to others that these intentions go prior because of the physical and verbal particles being gathered in this particular way. So to display the movement, to express the words, to appear in a certain way. That's based on the particles themselves. That makes it visible to others.
Pechashana and Tiu Tuma Tasogi Ipsu Kopana San Tiusna Do Chung Chung Mangbogi Tagi Ibdao Sovado Do Chung Ge Tai Ibjimo Motagi Ibdao Shingdongi Ibdao Sona Tirukala Ipsu Koba de Tongwana Ibde Motagi Ibden the Tongi Kablas Diu Nam Tongwa Yingis Do Chung Denzo Tongyores Didu Dele Shen Tongyo Chiame Do Chung Tongyore Do Chung Dile and Shen Toya Kaya Me Kis Yinayang Do Chung Diu Nam Tongwi Gone Do Chung Denzo Nagang Joge make it Tongwi Gone Diu Do Chung Denzo Diu Nam Guluki Ip Teyang Shebashino Guluki Serigala in the Kodang Sodangji Pena Motagi Ibdo Shingdongi Ibdo Tai Ibdo Kanso di Ibdang as a Tongi was Petina Shin Res Petina Shin Petina Shingi Petina Shingi Pena Petina Shingi Chak Salwa Dang Do Dumba Mane Shedangi Goni Mila Dekba Siltuba Lava Tenzo ki Ta Tenzo ki Gyude Tene Suku Krongi Ib Gyurdangde ane pena khani tadan do de dhomba de pena khani chikchupo lamne shenla dekba de ani gyu imbas di gyu imbala tene diu chaksalwa do dhomba shenla dekba la soba de chungsunga sene ngoshigi des peshashana do chungchung denzo tong do chungchung tong shimbikala do degi ip tatang tene shingdongdang moda korongi ip denzo 냠도 통하나 생기지네 안테데 단다데 모자당 신동당 따라 소바 리모 디기 규데 따 도충충 된절에 세와 레 섬네 아니 코기 규데 모자당 행동 나서디 입되기 규데 아니 디 도충충데 임바레스네 하고기로와 다는 신게 차찰바당 도덤바당 덱바 측초바 제바디 레데기 규데 아니 류보된조 데 구제 당조데 구제 당조데 류고 요굴 남규르 제바디 레스네 아니 하고기 레스 다디 인디칼라 넘버 렉체기 속세인데 따오든데 코롱기 규데 임바데 모시와도지 베나 모타기 입 따기 입데 되기 도 되기 규데 도 충충충충 데 임바데 해와나신 도 충충충충나 때네 모타데 중송 섬에 해와데 모타데 중화데 도 충충나 때네 중화레스네 리 규데 모시와나신 게 차차살바당 도듬바당 신라 데발라소베 규데 아니 류데 요굴 제와데 레도스 되네 류고 요굴 제와라 때네 되네 차살바라소바 도듬바당 식주 두고라소바데 lep송 삼에 데데스네 모시와데라 넘버 릭체기 속스나 어디데스 나브레스 단 넘버 릭체 마임베 속데 어디데스 모시기요 마레 송레다 되네 말라 숨기도 마오니
How is that? When seeing a number of pebbles arranged in the shape of a horse, for instance, one sees all the pebbles, and there is indeed nothing else to see other than them. Yet, by means of seeing the pebbles, one also understands the shape in which the pebbles are arranged. So if you have many small stones, then we can create a picture in the shape of a horse, a car, or a tree out of these small stones. Really, all that can be perceived are the small stones, are these pebbles. But based on these pebbles, we can understand also the shape of the thing that is being arranged, the shape of a horse, a car, or a tree, and so on. So that can also be apprehended based on these many small stones. Well, really, the only object that we see are these small stones, right? The only thing that we can actually see as a thing are the stones. But we understand the shape of a car that is made up from these small stones. So this is an example for what is meant here with the physical and verbal particles activated by oneself or made perceptible to others. So these actions, the karmic actions of doing prostrations, reciting the sutras, or negatively out of anger, hitting others or speaking in harsh words and so on, all of these karmic actions become visible to others based on the movement and the arrangement and the expression of these physical movements and physical and verbal arrangements, shapes, forms. So when we have to identify the elements, the embraced elements here. So the four elements and the mind that arrange the body in such a way as the physical basis, the four elements as the physical basis, that if arranged in a certain way leads to us to understand that someone engages in the karmic action of doing prostrations or reciting the sutras, beating someone out of anger, and so on. So again, when we have small stones and we form a picture out of these small stones, that lead to the idea or lead to the perception of a horse or a car or a tree, then all we really see, all that we can really perceive are these pebbles. That's what we come into contact with. But we understand the shape of the horse or the car based on these pebbles, based on the specific arrangement or movement of these pebbles. And so through the specific kind of a movement or expression of our physical body, the elements that make up our physical body, then the onlooker can perceive the karmic act of prostrations. So it is like the cause for that kind of perception is the very physical forms that are arranged or move in a certain way, both speaking about physical body and verbal speech. So we have to understand that the physical elements, the physical forms, they and the movement of these physical forms themselves are the cause for the perception of karmic actions or any kind of actions. And while that describes these imperceptible forms. So it's the imperceptible forms are caused, or they can themselves not be perceived, but we directly, like the horse, we do not see a horse, we only see the pebbles that make the shape of the horse. And so the movement of the physical elements allows us to know the karmic actions of the prostrations and so on, while that is the complete is not the complete form, the imperceptible form is not be seen, but we can see the physical arrangement, the physical movement of these elements.
네, 대신 네, rikje min sukyangsan, number rikje mind sukyangsan, dana lu bena lu gi le su bena sokcho ba pangwa dikana dumba ji top yongirwa sokcho pangwi dumbas bena bena nima nishu badula sokcho gi mes ne la batao dene sokcho pangwa tao de lunga gi le khebarwa yimba la rikje gi suktang dayang sa sok chugi mes lamne sok ma chu ne dewaji dene de rikje gi suktang dayang migla so gi thongtugi res ta ko sok ma chu wa dewa thongirwa 아니 다나시 나 니마 주의봐도 속초기 매람나 나악대가 속이 nencho라양 고기로와 어디니 인디가라 데 지단기 렉제기 소단 다양사 다양 이나양 데 랑꾸니 롱제 룽아기 차데 랑기 유임버 현라 릭버 미제데스 데스레가라 penna luigi gone sokcho ta sokcho pangi lamne lu sokma chune de tadang khane yang ta nga nima chui ba do la sokcho gi mes ne la ba on de gi se de number reche mai be su domba de se ke chidu la la re kuni longche se ke gi chidu la lunga gi cha dan gi de luigi gone sokma chu wa de wa dang de nima chui ring la sokcho gi mes ne lab de wa nga gi cha de gi rangi gyu imbar henla rikpar meche de se 제 number 이제 많이 봤어 domba 되기 domba 랑기 유 임바데라 강사 신단 신단 돌라 통톡이 말에 세고 유임바 변나 코이 가라서 나가 니마 주의 봐도 속 주기 매스네 라브레 아니 소마체와 데 디데 통계요데 이나양 디데 number 이제 많이 베기 단다디 다디데 domba 되기 유도 임바데 유 임바데 신라 리기요 말에서 가연스나 다데 규이나 베나 domba deta kanja yome tongyo yo marwa tongyo yo marela 코라 때문에 코지에 송선에 통교 말해 bên 단지 직대 다디 입 저지 도충충 되게 다디 입디 통래 다디 입디 통면도 갈라 다디 입대 도충충 규딜에 되는 종래 선에 람나 규대 나 다디기 리무디기 입대디 도충충 되도 임바지 통기도 와 다디 통서위 첼라야 도충충 통기도 와 bên 모자디기 입디 통서위 첼라 모자디기 규대 도충충 통기도 와 대낭신 단답 도루 디 돈바데 통네 돈바데기 규데 페나가 류속 저기 맨센 라이 다데당 류속 마치와 대화데 규 인반이도 통게 말레스 레퍼 메체데스 남마르지 마임비 숙스나 오딘데스네 라바레스 마레 메체데스 페나 다 류속 저기 맨센 랍네 록 류속 마치와 당 nga sok chegi mesen lamne ne sok ma chune debi kap de la penna domba ji thobera di domba thobende kala gangsa de domdem ji gangsa ki domba di tawo she di lu sok thongwa samji mishiba sheno de gangsa de ki didu kapla ko lu de da ngazo thongge de te yinayang domba de ta di sok meje la ge domba de dinere snazo thongtugi mara di imbala ten number riche maim ba sen o tendesne number riche maim be sugde tendesne moje chire ta tende malaya o tendere tena di la number riche mimba tang di mingla ani di sugde ge domba de ge mingla number rikpar chegi midus thongtugi midus tene de mixe la tendu mes ani lu la sopa ge thoge tang rege dang me thogme ge zu she jawro chedo.
Imperceptible forms are also a particular feature of physical or verbal actions. Though similar to perceptible forms, through them alone it is not perceptible to others that the physical or verbal aspects of an action activated by oneself are one's own substance. For instance, a particular vow taken by a person is not readily perceived merely by seeing his body. These kind of forms are therefore called imperceptible forms, demonstratable forms, undemonstratable forms, or unobstructing forms. So, if we say, I'm not gonna kill for any being for the next 20 days. This is then the vow of abandoning killing. And so with that, one refrains from the physical action of killing. We can see it when someone makes that kind of vow. So the expression of I will not, like making the vow, I will not kill for the next 20 days, for the next 10 days, or ever again. So this kind of expression is something, the promise, the vow that one takes is at that point when one expresses it, something that can be perceived by someone else. We can see it, how that person expresses it, and we can also hear the words that are spoken to make this promise. But then afterwards, actually, it is not in any way visible to us whether a person who has once made such a promise has this kind of vow, has this kind of promise or not. So after saying, I will not kill for the next 20 days, that person will refrain from killing. But someone who then meets that person will not see that the cause for the refraining from killing is that he took that vow, that he made this promise not to kill. So after the initial physical and verbal expression that results in the vow, then the vow itself is invisible, is imperceptible for anyone who looks at the person with that vow. We cannot see that another person is endowed with a vow, has a vow or not. So only the first expression, like the expression in the ritual of taking a promise or a vow, which is through physical actions and verbal actions, we can see that. We can see the movement of the body and speech, the expression of body and speech that bring about the vow. But then we cannot perceive that such a vow has been taken later on, that a person, any given person, might have or not have a vow that makes them refrain from killing, or that we see that that person is not killing. We don't know whether that person is just not killing or whether that person has a vow to not kill. So we can see when we think back to the example with the pebbles and the horse or the car, that's something that we can perceive. We can perceive we see the picture, we see the picture of the car, and then someone might point out to us, actually, if you look closely, it's all made up of small pebbles, and all that you really see are small pebbles, but they're arranged in a way that they appear as this car. So in the same way, at the initial stage, we might just see that someone is taking a vow, like that we think of it as this action, but we can be told that all that we really perceive that is being done is the movement of the body and the expressions of the speech. So it's all based on the elements of the physical body and the speech. But later, after this visible part, the visible cause of taking the vows is finished, then it is impossible for us to perceive the vow itself. That's why it's called an imperceptible form or undemonstrable form, because we cannot show it to anyone. There's nothing that we can make someone else see to know that someone has this vow. And it's not something that is then physically touchable for us. It's not a tangible object to take a hold of. So we can't see it, we can't touch it, but it is present after the taking of the vow. I will stop here for today, and please join me in reciting the dedication and the aspiration verses. Listen.
Chambal Bawe Chinara Kemba Dan Kundo Sambo Deyan Dejende Teda Kunje Jesu Dalom Jin Gewa Deda Tamje Radu Mon Duzum Shebe Janwa Tamje Mowa Kanla Chondo Ngabande Tagi Kibe Zawa Indingwa Sambo Junche Rado Ngowanje Sunam De Tamje Sebani Tomne Nyen Tranam Pamje Ne Jega Nache Bala Vichubayi Sibe Chole Dova Dolova Shu Kewa Di Kewo Kun Sonam Yeshe Toto Shin Sonam Yeshe Le Chungwa Tamba Kunye Tomba Shu Lo Chusu Dovare Chingi Labdo So Chu Lamdo Dovare Chingi Labdo So Nam Chulwa Silvare Chingi Labdo So Chulwa Yeshe So Shavare Chingi Labdo So Lasso
Lasso Tuchinang.
Tichena
Today's attendance question, which I forgot, is how did Dominic make Inka laugh at the end of class? So how did Dominic make Inka laugh at the end of class? One other thing that I wanted to mention is that please keep sending in the topics that you don't understand. Clearly mention which ones are for a Lopanla as a meaning explanation. But if you have problems with the lists or definitions and those kind of things, then those are questions for me. And I will change the system a little bit. There are a few questions that are really nice for discussion topics, and I will keep them for the review class. But the rest I'm gonna copy paste into our recordings, class topics, and clarifications. Now it's also clarifications channel, and I'm gonna answer them briefly there. So whatever problem you have, I can answer it straight away, or some of your fellow students might answer if you post it somewhere else. But so the review classes are too far away, and you need quicker clarification. And because we're not physically in the same room, you can't come up to me right after class and I can just tell you. So if you need any clarification, I always check all the attendance quizzes in the same evening. So then you will get the most pressing answers already the same day, if that makes any sense. So please keep telling me what you have trouble with, and then I will post them, and then we will still review everything again in the review class. But it's up to you to find out what you don't know. So that that everything's answered for everyone. Okay, thank you.
Okay, see you tomorrow. Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.